Good morning, folks. It's time for us to begin our class, and welcome to those who are on the live stream. Let's see if I can get the slide to move here. There it goes. A little technical problem there. My finger was in the wrong spot. Beautiful Lord's Day, in spite of the warm temperatures outside. It's also not too warm in here, but we got heating problems again, so I think there's a valve they're missing or something going on there. Maybe they'll get it fixed one of these days, but by then it'll probably be wishing we had the air conditioner on. With the weather, we can't tell. But it's a beautiful day, and we're glad everybody's here. Welcome those watching on the live stream as well. We're looking today at Esther chapter 3, and Haman plots against the Jews. And skip through a couple thoughts here. Here we go. Esther 3 and verse 1. We want to ask, who was Haman? After these events, that's important. After these events, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and established his authority over all the princes who were with him. So, who was this Haman? Well, he says he's the son of Hammedatha, and he was an Agagite. What in the world is an Agagite? This is governed, and if you're doing any reading and commentaries outside of class, which I highly recommend you do, most of the ones I've looked at follow what Josephus says. Josephus was a Jew 70 years or so after the birth of Christ. He was kind of a leader of the zealots against the Roman Empire, and he turncoated, cooperated with the Romans, and they kind of commissioned him to write a history of the Jews. It's very interesting reading. He used a lot of facts and a whole lot of imagination. And some things that he says you take with a grain of salt, and some of his statements you take with the whole box because you're not real sure what he's got in mind. And a lot of what he said is slanted, or shall we say biased, but still it's a good source of information. But Josephus says that Haman was a descendant of Agag. Agag, the king of the Amalekites, whom Saul was supposed to destroy. And you remember that story in 1 Samuel chapter 15, I believe it is. God told Samuel to tell Saul to go down and destroy, completely obliterate the Amalekites. Remember that story? So he got 200,000 infantry men, 10,000 men from Judah, and they go down and they tell the Kenites, who were kin to Moses some way, to get out of the country. And then they attacked and destroyed all the Amalekites, except Agag, who was their king and the choicest of the livestock that he said when they got back they were going to use for sacrifice. Now, why he brought the king back, that's kind of a trophy. And in that day, and if you go back and read through the book of Joshua and the conquest of Canaan, there were kings who had other kings that they had conquered who served under them. And when I say served under them, served in a very humiliating role. One of them said he'd cut off the thumbs and big toes of a number of kings, and they basically crawled around under the table and around looking for scraps. He had them humiliated because I think without your big toes you can't walk. And of course without your thumb you can't pick up a whole lot. So they were humiliated. And they were like trophies to these kings. So it seems like maybe Saul brought Agag back to be more of a trophy. Saul, you remember, was an ancestor, at least in family, of Mordecai. Mordecai chapter 2 says he was the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjaminite. Kish was the father of Saul. But there's nothing in the scripture that I can find that says that Kish was the direct ancestor of Mordecai. Shimei, in 2 Samuel, is the one who threw stones and dust and curses at David when he was getting out of Jerusalem to get away from the attack of Absalom. Shimei was a Benjaminite and was probably in the same oversized family or family group that Samuel or Saul was. But Shimei and Kish are really not that distant cousins anyway. So to say that, and Josephus says that if that's true, then there is an ancient reason for the hatred between Agag and Saul, and Haman, his descendant, and Mordecai, the other descendant. But that can't be true. That doesn't make sense. And here's why. First of all, if that is true, Mordecai was the son of Jair, the son of Shimei. It's not the same Kish as in 1 Samuel. It's not the same Shimei that we found in 2 Samuel. So there's a difference there. Second, the names of Haman and Hammedatha are Persian names, not Canaanite, Hebrew, Semite, or something of that nature. In other words, they're a whole different family of names. And so that doesn't make sense either way. If he was a descendant of Agag, why is he called an Agagite? Agag was the king of the Amalekites. So Agag would have been an Amalekite, and any of his descendants would have been Amalekites. The descendants of Saul are not called Saulites. They're called Benjaminites because they're of the tribe of Benjamin. And so the question there, why call him an Agagite? And the problem is, and of course a lot of the commentaries have followed this same theme, and there's a rabbinical tradition that either predated or followed after Josephus that says they got to be kin somewhere along the way, and that's why the hatred. However, an inscription has been found, written by Sargon, who was the king of Assyria 721 to 705, and he mentions Agag as a province of Persia. And that province was near to Media. Now, if we go back to the map and you find the Tigris or Euphrates rivers, Media is directly north of the point of the Persian Gulf. And Agag was somewhere around that. So it would make better sense if we saw that Haman was an individual from that province. That would make sense. Mordecai was from Susa, which was the capital, and Haman was from the province of Agag. Now that makes a whole lot better sense, but a lot of the commentaries seem to avoid that. In chapter 3, verse 1, Haman is promoted to be the Grand Vizier, or Chiliarch, I think as the King James translates it. In other words, he was the top dog in the court of Xerxes or Ahasuerus. There were a number of advisors, counselors, headmen. We would compare them to the president's cabinet in our government. They were his counselors. One was in charge of the treasury, one was in charge of the library, one was in charge of the military, and this guy was in charge of all of them. He was the chief of that cabinet of group of men. If you had an appointment for some reason to see the king, if you had received an invitation to come see the king, you would sit out in the court. You are not allowed into the king's palace or rooms. You sat out in the outside court until Haman came and called you. And if you did anything wrong, Haman was the one who called for your execution immediately. Now, back up just a little bit. If you go back to Agag and the thing with Saul brought him back as a prisoner, but it was Samuel, who was an Ephraimite, who actually killed Agag. David later wipes out another group of Amalekites. So did Saul wipe them all out, or was there a family that he skipped or missed that weren't at home when he came and destroyed with Agag, that situation? We're not real sure. But the Amalekites, by the way, just for fun, descended from Esau through one of his sons and his concubines. So, but that's a whole other reading, another story. All right, so that's Haman. Chapter 3, verses 2 through 6, the beginning of the animosity between Haman and Mordecai. All the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why are you transgressing the king's command?" Now it was when they had spoken daily to him and he would not listen to them that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's reason would stand. For he had told them that he was a Jew. Now that's key. When Haman saw that Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage to him, Haman was filled with rage. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him who the people of Mordecai were. Therefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. So, the king says, he's my head man, everyone bow down to him. Now, I've introduced you to Herodotus before, who was the Greek historian of this time frame, born about the same time as Ahasuerus became king. Herodotus says that the Persians, when they greeted each other, there were different forms. Now, how do we greet each other? We shake hands, I guess now fist bump or elbow bump, whatever you feel comfortable with. But used to, we'd shake hands, and if we were close, you know, the man would grab a hand and pull it and grab an arm around it, kind of a hug, put an arm around a woman, give a hug. You know, that's how we would greet each other. The Persians of equal rank, when they met each other, would kiss each other on the mouth. Now, that was not a love kiss. Okay, just kind of don't think that. It's just their way of greeting. If it was a person of lower rank, the lower rank person would kiss the upper rank person on the cheek. Kind of like we see in the movies the French do. And I guess other nationalities as well. All right, so that's how now, if it was somebody of an extremely lower rank, then they would bow. Okay. But why does Mordecai refuse to bow to Haman? First of all, bow does not mean nod the head. We respectfully meet each other. This is so-and-so. We kind of nod our head. Good to meet you. It was not the bend at the waist bow down, like we might imagine. It's actually laying down, prostrate, hands outstretched, face on the ground. That's what was expected. Now, some of them will get on their knees and bow down, put their face on the ground. But the word bow here, it means actually lay prostrate on the ground. So when Haman came out and walked around, everybody around him was supposed to fall down to their faces on the ground in an attitude of worship. So why did Mordecai refuse to bow? Because it was worship to Haman. The 10 Commandments. You know those? You ever heard of those? Thou shalt have no other God before me. I am the Lord thy God, nobody else. Thou shalt not worship any graven image. And involved in that is any person who has an image. And if you go back and you look at Exodus 20, read through very carefully, those 10 statements were made by the voice of God, not to Moses, on Mount Sinai. God spoke from the top of Mount Sinai, from the cloud, the thunder, and the storm that was up there, and the lightning and all, to all of Israel. They were assembled around Mount Sinai, and they heard the voice of God speaking. Now, somewhere in our storybooks, we've got that. Moses got up there and rolled that down, came back and told everybody. They heard God speak. You've seen that I spoke to you from the cloud. Do not make an image. How do you make an image of a cloud? Or a lightning bolt? Or thunder? Or a voice? Now, I think that's key because when John the Baptist comes, he says, I am the voice. Now, tie that in with Jesus being the Word of God. That's another study to give you something to think about for a while. But God, so when Israel heard God speak in Exodus 20, they went to Moses and said, hey, look, you go talk to God, come back, tell us what he said. We don't want to hear his voice anymore. And God said, that's one of the smartest things they've done, is to ask for that. So Moses went up to Mount Sinai, got the tablets of stone, came back down, and we know the story from there. And we'll go through that in our Sunday morning class. All right, so, in our sermons. So that being the case, Mordecai refused to bow down because Haman was the king's representative. He represented the king, and the Persians, not unlike other cultures, saw the king as divine. In Egypt, Pharaoh, that's his title, not his name. Pharaoh was considered as the son of the gods. I mean, Mama raised him from a boy, but when he became Pharaoh, that heritage was lost. He was considered then to be divine as the son of their gods. And that transfers to other cultures as well, and as well as to the Persians. So they thought the king to be divine. So if we bow before the king like that, it means that we're worshiping him as a god. So Mordecai refused to do that. Now, Haman, excuse me, Haman would not attack Mordecai. He could have said, okay, have that man executed. That would solve the issue. But instead, Haman thought he would wipe out all of the Jews. Now, the Persians were pretty much tolerant of all the peoples of their empires. You back up to the map we've had, you kind of see it in the shadow behind the wording up here. That's a massive empire, 127 provinces, some 60 different nations plus represented. They were pretty tolerant of all these cultures and all their practices and all their ideas and their religions and their ideals. They just accepted that as long as they paid their tributes. And there's a chart you can find if you look up the Persian Empire provinces, and you find the list of how much each province was to pay annually. I think one of them had 400 talents of silver. Another one had 300 plus the silver or the talents they had to give, 360 horses every year. That's one for each day of the year. And these were used for the cavalry of the Persians. But so Haman would not attack just Mordecai, but all the Jews. And so that seemed to be contrary to the Persians' concept of toleration towards the other people. But what does that reveal about the character of Haman? Ponder that one. To have one person be an irritant and decide to wipe out an entire nation of people just because of one person. Was Haman selfish? Was he proud? Think about that. We're going to come back to that question here in a little bit. Chapter 3, verse 7 through 11, casting of the poor, or pur. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, pur, that is the lot, was cast before Haman from day to day and from month to month, until the 12th month, that is the month Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of all other people. They do not observe the king's laws, so it is not in the king's interest to let them remain. If it is pleasing to the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who carry on the king's business to put in the king's treasuries. Then the king took his signet ring from his hand, gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. The king said to Haman, the silver is yours, and the people also, to do with them as you please. All right, let's get our timeline. In chapter 2, verse 16, Esther is made queen in the 10th month of the 7th year of the reign of Ahasuerus. That is the month Tebeth. In chapter 3, verse 7, in the first month of the 12th year, Esther has been queen 4 or 5 years. Ponder that one. She's been queen for a while. This didn't happen a couple of days after her queenship. 4 years have gone by. And the first month, which is the month of Nisan, and the 12th year of the reign of King Ahasuerus, this takes place, this casting of the poor. We'll come back to that in a second. Let's get down the calendar. Just to help you out, and I know you can't make notes this quick, and that's okay. If you want to copy this, I can get it for you. You can look it up online. The first month of their year, the Jewish year, was Nisan. That's not the car you drive that has two S's in it, okay? And it compares to our March, April. So the middle of our March to the middle of our April. During the month of Nisan, that's the beginning of their religious new year. So God told Moses in Exodus 12, this is the beginning of months. This is the month of Nisan. This is your first month. On the 14th day of the month, you eat the Passover. So on the 14th of Nisan was the Passover. On the 21st was the Feast of First Fruits. And that week between Passover and First Fruits is called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. For a whole week they ate unleavened bread in honor of this Exodus and escape from Egypt. The second month is Adar, compares to our middle of April to middle of May. The third month is Sivan, from May to June. And the 6th of Sivan was the day of Pentecost, 50 days after Passover. The fourth month, Tammuz, corresponds to our June and July. The fifth month is Ab, or Av, from July to August, or part of it. Elul, the sixth month, middle of August to middle of September. Seventh month is Tishri, middle of September to middle of October. That is the beginning of their civil New Year. So they have a religious New Year beginning in Nisan and a civil New Year beginning in Tishri. On the first day of the month was the Feast of Trumpets. I forgot to put that on there. On the 10th of the month was the Day of Atonement. On the 15th to the 21st was the Feast of Tabernacles. So go back and read all Exodus, you'll find all that stuff out there, as well as Numbers and Leviticus. And the 8th month was Marchesvan, or Marchesvan, however you want to call that one, from October to our November. The 9th month was Kislev, middle of our November to middle of December. And the 25th of Kislev, not the 25th of December. Looks up that, so wait a minute, no. That's the 25th of Kislev, is the Feast of Dedication. Now that's not commanded by God. After the Persian Empire, Alexander the Great comes through, 333, destroys the Persian Empire, sets up the Greek Empire. 68 or so BC, the Romans come through, conquer Greece, and they conquer Israel. The 100 years before Rome came in, while the Greeks were ruling over Palestine, remember Alexander the Great died, and he handed out his kingdom to 4 different generals. The Seleucids got what we think of as Syria, Ptolemy's got Egypt, and Canaan was in between, and Palestine in between. They got kicked back and forth. Antiochus Epiphanes, one of the Seleucid kings, let's put it this way, he went to Jerusalem, he took a pig, sacrificed it on the altar, threw the pig's blood all over the temple, made a mess of things, and boarded it up so the Jews could not worship God anymore. The Maccabean, the priests who were found with the Maccabees, led a revolt, and in the middle of this month, Kislev, they got rid of the Syrian rule, they opened up, cleaned up the temple, and had a big feast of dedication. And John's gospel indicates that Jesus observed this feast on at least one occasion. So that's the 25th of Kislev. Hanukkah on our calendar. Okay, that's where that ties into our calendar. The 10th month was Tebeth, from our December to January. That's when our Christmas day would fall. The 11th month, Shabbat, from January to February. And the 12th month, Adar, middle of February to middle of March. And on the 13th and 14th of Adar was the Feast of Purim, which comes out here of the book of Esther. And then I've got in smaller print, Adar Shani, which was the intercalary month. They had a lunar calendar, 28, 29 days. When they realized they were off schedule, they stuck in this Adar Shani. It may have been a few days, it may have been a week, it may have been 3 weeks. It was put in without any form or fashion or schedule, just, oh, by the way, we need to have that month, so they did. Must be nice to be that way about a calendar, not tied to the day timer or whatever. But in chapter 3, verses 7 through 11, they cast the poor. Now, the poor, think of a dice, a 1-inch cube made out of clay. It does not have the dots on it like our die would have. Instead, it would have a symbol or a few words of a prayer. or some kind of a message. And they've uncovered several of these that date back to the time of Shalmaneser, who was before the Persian Empire. And the way this thing worked, they would take a board and they would write on it what they were trying to figure out. So here we'll put the 12 months. And they would cast a pour. And if it landed 3 times in a row on the same spot, that's the one, third time's charm. And so with this one, landed on Adar 3 times in a row. So that's the month. Now we do it again for the days. And it wound up with the 13th day. So that's how that would work. So Adar the 13th was chosen as the day for Haman's revenge. Now get your thinking mind on the first month of the 12th year, they cast a pour, or the lot, to decide when to do this. The 12th month, the 13th day, is the day picked. They've got a year to get this planned and prepared and then accomplished. But look at Haman's deceit, verses 8 and 9. He goes to the king. There is a certain people. Notice he didn't say which ones. They're scattered throughout the empire. Their laws are different. They do not observe the king's laws. They do not live in the king's interest. 4 reasons why we need to exterminate these people. They're scattered throughout the empire, and being scattered like that, with different laws like they have, they don't observe the king's laws, and they're going to be a bad influence on those that do. And they don't live in the king's interest, and so they're going to be a bad influence on others. So it'd be good if we just got rid of them. So Hashi was sitting there saying, that sounds like a good idea, but, that's going to be expensive. So Haman says, I'll give 10,000 talents of silver to cover the cost. So he's going to put 10,000 talents of silver into the king's treasury to pay for this extermination. So how much was that? A talent of silver equals 75 pounds, depending on where you read. I found 66 pounds, 60 pounds, 125 pounds. So I just went down to 75 because it's an easier number to deal with. 10,000 talents of silver would equal 750,000 pounds. You can check my math, I don't mind. That's 12 million ounces, or 375 tons of silver. Now you think about how much Haman had in order to give that much. So how much was that? Well, I did a little research. Right now, silver sells at $22.58 an ounce. So doing the math, 10,000 talents equals $270,960,000. That would pay Orkin a pretty good premium, or Terminex, or whoever else you called on to do this exterminating. Imagine having that kind of cash. Just say, I'll throw this into the king's treasury. Haman was a wealthy man. Ahasuerus was a wealthy king. If one province out of the 127 every year contributed 400 talents, that's just one of the 127. There were numbers of them who had to pay 400 talents a year. Others more, others less. It gets mind-boggling how much came into the king's treasury on an annual basis. Now, just by comparison, it said of the days of Solomon, there was so much gold in Jerusalem that silver was valued as dust. That's hard for us to fathom. Now, just think how much gold they used. The temple was plated with gold. Now, you buy your jewelry, and it says plated with 10-karat gold, and they take the chain, they dip it in and yank it out real quick because they don't put a whole lot of gold on there. This ain't no little thing you can scratch off. We're talking about inch-thick plates of gold on the wall, and they are carved or decorated. It's just hard for us to grasp how much gold that really was. He had shields made of gold just to hang on the walls. They were not used in battle or warfare. They were just decorations. So you think about what size a shield would be and have it made out of gold, which if I think is right, is a heavy metal. And a shield of gold would weigh 100, 200 pounds. You ain't carrying on your armor protection. And think of the anchors you'd take in the wall to hold that sucker up. The whole wall covered with them. So when you read the king comes and attacks and takes away some of the treasures, that's what he's hauling off. How much gold they really had. Well, so yeah, this was a wealthy, by our standards, culture. At least the rulership. The citizens probably did not live that well. So, the king says, here's my signet ring, do as you please. The silver is yours. In other words, spend the money, I don't care. You're paying for it. And here's my signet ring. Now, the king had a number of different signets. He had kind of a pedestal that had a stamp on it that he would use as a seal. But he also had a ring, sometimes made of chalcedony, and it would have a picture or the image of the king, oftentimes the king doing something heroic like killing a lion or something like that, or riding a big stallion. So a very small insignia. And wearing it as a ring gave all the authority to the ring bearer. So it was given to Haman and said, here's my ring, do what you want to. In other words, you have carte blanche. Do whatever you wish. So Haman sets out to write this letter. Verse 12. Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month. So this took a couple of weeks to get all these planned out. And as it was written, just as Haman commanded, the king's satraps to the governors who were over each province, to the princes of each people, each province according to its script, each people according to its language, being written in the name of the king Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet ring. So Haman dictates the letter. Letters are sent by couriers. We talked about that a week or two ago, how in 7 to 9 days they could have a message all the way across the empire on this Pony Express idea that they had. Just imagine getting that news out in a couple of weeks' time. Verse 13, the letters are sent by couriers to all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to seize their possessions as plunder. Okay, why would I go out and kill my Jewish neighbor? Ain't done me anything wrong. Well, you can take whatever he's got. Okay, I got a motive now. Besides, it's the king's decree. The king's told me to go and kill the Jews next door and to take whatever they have as my own to plunder. A copy of this edict was issued as law in every province, verse 14, published to all the people so that they should be ready for this day. The couriers went out impelled by the king's command while the decree was issued at the citadel in Susa. So some guys walking around with a hammer and a handful of tacks and a bunch of these pages, tacking them up on the telephone poles, on the doors, taping up in the windows of the barbershop so everybody can read. Now this is done on the 13th day of the month Nisan. What happened on the 14th day? The letters are written, sent out, and the news in Susa the day before Passover. Now think how that affects the Jews. They're getting ready to observe the Passover. No, they can't be at the temple in Jerusalem. It's in ruins. Well, it's had been rebuilt by this time. They couldn't go there, but throughout the empire, they were observing the Passover. I mean, Daddy was out collecting firewood, to cook the lamb. Junior was out there with the hide, scraping it, getting it ready to be used for something else. His little brother hauled the entrails off to be burned somewhere else. They were all doing their thing for the Passover. Mama's in there getting the bread ready and all the vegetables, the horseradish, the bitter herbs, and other things to go with it. Everybody's busy, and the news breaks. We got basically 11 months before we're exterminated. So, and I like the last part of that verse, the day of destruction. I missed something here. The day of destruction was the 13th of Adar, the 12th month. The king Xerxes and Haman sat down to drink, and the city of Susa was in confusion. Not to mention the rest of the empires, the news breaks. We're getting ready for the Passover, and we get this news. And the biggest question in the whole city, why? I don't understand. These Jewish neighbors are good people. They've invited me to Passover tomorrow. This guy's a good businessman. This family makes the best baskets you can buy. And on and on the list goes. Why have them executed? Why would the king order such a thing? So they were in confusion. Now question. What can we understand about Haman? What was he like? Answer out loud. This is where you talk. Give me a word or two. Louder. Spiteful. I have to repeat it for the live stream. He was spiteful. What else? A sociopath. I can't spell that one. I barely say it. He's a sociopath. What else? What was Haman like? Crazy. We put him in that a lot quickly. Arrogant. Thank you. Selfish. Conceited. Proud. Let his position go to his head. Thought he was better than anybody else. I'm getting some head nodding here. I guess people online are nodding as well. I hope they're not nodding off to sleep. Okay. I'm going to quit preaching and go to meddling. Don't answer. In what ways are we sometimes like Haman? In what ways are we sometimes like Haman? When we see someone of a different status, not necessarily lower, not necessarily high, a different status that we conceive that we have between us and them. How are we like Haman? Thankfully, we don't have $270 million in silver to get paid to have them exterminated. But how are we like Haman? In some ways. Not all the time, but at sometimes. It may be momentary. When we're driving down the road and somebody cuts us off. Or I'll let you fill in the blanks. Makes us think, perhaps, that we can sometimes be just as bad, although we count ourselves to be quite good. Well, I hope you have a great week. Hope God will bless you. We're dismissed.